it 啦是口语正式开始的第一题，一般会考6到7题，预读的时间是35到40秒。评分的点主要是3个：发音、流利度和内容。交叉评分的项目是 speaking and reading。我们要注意就是在考试的时候，如果3秒钟不出声，机器就会自动闭麦。然后在开始的时候，它是会有 B 的一声提示，读完之后要手动的按 Next。那平常我们在练习的时候需要注意的是，第一，你的眼睛要训练的比嘴巴快，特别是换行的地方。第二的话就是朗读的时候不要自我纠正。第三的话就是考场如菜场，平常你要多做抗干扰训练。最后一个的话就是基金命中率其实一般，所以我们不要过度依赖。Read it aloud 的考试界面大概如下，它会有准备时间，那么准备时间结束之后，它会开始正式录音。考试的字体呢其实是比较小的，所以平常大家练习的时候要稍微注意一下。一般情况的话，大概会考2到3行左右的文段。我们平常在纠音的时候，主要是纠以下的这些内容，所以如果说你平常在家里边自己练习的时候，也可以朝着这个方向去进行一个纠正。首先的话，就是在发音部分，元音饱满，辅音清晰，连读、失去爆破这些都要注意，还有包括像一些清辅音浊化的语言现象，也是要稍微注意一下。包括句子的重弱读、单词的重弱读也是要注意，还有你的语音语调，其实 PTE 考试当中来讲不需要过度夸张的语音语调。那最后的话就是你声音的音质，看看是否有娃娃音，是否读得清晰。流利度部分来讲的话，就是意群要读得连贯，第二个语速要自然，停顿要合理，最后适时换气。
Tesla's theoretical work formed the basis of modern alternating current electrical systems. Thomas Edison promised Tesla almost $1 million in today's money to undertake motor and generator improvements. However, when Tesla eventually asked about the money, Edison's reported reply was, "Tesla, you don't understand our American humor." Tesla's theoretical work formed the basis of modern alternating current electric power systems. Thomas Edison promised him almost $1 million in today's money to undertake motor and generator improvement. However, when Tesla, the ethical Serb, asked about the money, Edison's reported reply was, "Tesla, you don't understand our American humor." The pair became arch rivals. Tesla actually worked for Edison in his early career. Edison offered to pay him the modern equivalent of $1 million to fix the problems he was having with his DC generators and motors. Tesla fixed Edison's machines, and when he asked him for the money that was promised, Edison laughed him off and had this to say, "Tesla, you don't understand our American humor." Tesla came over from Graz and went to work for Thomas Edison. Edison offered Tesla a job, promising Tesla $50,000 if Tesla could redesign Edison's breakdown-prone DC generator designs. The new generator designs were a vast improvement over Edison's originals. Upon completing the job, Tesla went to Edison to collect the $50,000 promised for the task. "Tesla," Edison replied, "you don't understand our American humor," and Tesla was never paid. For the first 2 or 3 years after the Second World War, a new title would often sell out within a few months of publication. However, unless public demand for the book was unusually high, they were rarely able to reprint it. With paper stock strictly rationed, they could not afford to use up precious paper or tie up their limited capital with a reprint. Networking is easy and fun because it taps into this human predilection to talk about ourselves when asked. Consider successful networking as little more than the process of guiding a person to tell you about his life, what he's doing, the company that employs him, and his current industry. The one-year program for the master's degree in global management is designed only for those who have the graduate degree and the thesis, increasing temporary skills of new managers in an international capacity, something that recruiters are looking for more and more. Another administration option is to bake marijuana at a relatively low temperature to kill any dangerous microorganisms and then allow that patient to eat or drink it. Both of these methods of administration make smoking the drug unnecessary. However, criticism of medical marijuana has also been raised, as it is a natural plant, it cannot be patented and marketed by pharmaceutical companies, and is unlikely to win widespread medical acceptance. Not a lot is known about how the transportation of goods by water first began. Large cargo boats were being used in some parts of the world up to 5,000 years ago. However, sea trade became more widespread when large sailing boats traveled between ports, carrying spices, perfumes and objects made by hand. History rubs shoulders and often overlaps with many other areas of research, from myths and epics to the social sciences, including economics, politics, biography, demography, and much more. Besides, some histories are almost pure narratives, while others go into detailed, tightly focused analyses. For example, the parish records of a Cornish village in the 16th century. Since its inception, the UN has been working to ensure adequate food for all through sustainable agriculture. The majority of the world's poorest people live in rural areas of developing countries. They depend on agriculture and related activities for their livelihoods. This makes them particularly vulnerable to man-made and natural influences that reduce agricultural production. How do we imagine the unimaginable if we're asked to think of an object, say a yellow tulip? A picture immediately forms in our mind's eye. But what if we try to imagine a concept such as the square root of a negative number? Cheerful sunny yellow is an attention-getter. While it is considered an optimistic color, people lose their tempers more often in yellow rooms, and babies will cry more. It is the most difficult color for the eye to take in, so it can be overpowering if overused. Yellow enhances concentration, hence its use for legal pads. It also speeds metabolism. Yellow is the most optimistic color, yet surprisingly, people lose their tempers most often in yellow rooms and babies cry more in them. The reason may be that yellow is the hardest color on the eye. On the other hand, it speeds metabolism and enhances concentration. Think of yellow legal pads and post-it notes. Yellow is considered as the most optimistic color, yet surprisingly, people lose their tempers most often in yellow rooms and babies will cry more. The reason may be that yellow is the hardest color for eyes to take in, so it can be overpowering if overused. Environmental problems caused by hard rock mining include water pollution by metals, chemicals used in processing, acid drainage, and sediment. Metals and metal-like elements in the ore are toxic and prone to cause trouble by ending up in nearby streams and water tables as a result of mining operations. Psychologist Saho Takagi, a graduate student at Kyoto University in Japan, strolls into one of Japan's many cat cafes. These establishments allow customers to pay an hourly fee for the chance to cuddle some cats. They're popular in Japan because so many apartment buildings forbid pet ownership. But Takagi isn't a typical customer. She's not there for feline affection, but to probe their minds. Orientalists, like many other 19th-century thinkers, conceive of humanity either in large collective terms or in abstract generalities. Orientalists are neither interested in nor capable of discussing individuals; instead, artificial entities predominate. Similarly, the age-old distinction between Europe and Asia or Occident and Orient herds beneath very wide labels every possible variety of human plurality, reducing it in this process to one or two terminal collective realities. Orientalists, like many other 19th-century thinkers, conceive of humanity either in large collective terms or in abstract generalities. Orientalists are neither interested in nor capable of discussing individuals; instead, artificial entities predominate. Herds beneath very wide labels every possible variety of human plurality, reducing it in the process to one or two terminal collective abstractions. Along with customary classes on subjects such as finance, accounting, and marketing, today's MBA students are enrolling in courses in environmental policy and stewardship. According to a survey of 91 U.S. business schools published in October 2005, more than half require a course in environmental sustainability or corporate social responsibility. Along with customary classes on subjects such as finance, accounting, and marketing, today's MBA students are enrolling on courses for environmental policy and stewardship. Indeed, more than half of business schools require a course in environmental sustainability or corporate social responsibility, according to a survey of 91 U.S. business schools, published in October 2005. The provision of accurate and authoritative statistical information strengthens our society. It provides a basis for decisions to be made on public policy, such as determining electoral boundaries and where to locate schools and hospitals. It also allows businesses to know their market, grow their business, and improve their marketing strategies by targeting their activities appropriately. Australians do speak English; however, for some tourists and travellers, it can be difficult to understand the slang. Also, the links between Australian and American English were seen to be very tenuous. At least some colloquialisms in Australian English do not exist in other types of English. Australians speak English, of course. But for many tourists and even some locals, Australian English has only tenuous links with mother tongue. Our speech is prepared with words and phrases whose arcane means understood only by the initiate. It is these colourful colloquialisms that Australian slang set to truly explain. The curriculum enhances the general management program with health-related courses, Dr. Schulman says. Required courses include healthcare in the 21st century and the economics and strategy of health sector management. Students may also take electives such as medical device commercialization, healthcare marketing, and the economics and management of the pharmaceutical industry. By this time, however, paleontological momentum had moved to England. In 1812, at Lyme Regis on the Dorset coast, an extraordinary child named Mary Anning, aged 11, 12 or 13, depending on whose account you read, found a strange fossilized sea monster, 17 feet long and known as the Ichthyosaurus, embedded in the steep and dangerous cliffs along the English Channel. A hazard assessment should be performed for work involving distillations of organic liquids, and should thoroughly address issues relating to residual water and possible decomposition of the solvent in question, as well as the physical placement of the distillation apparatus and heating equipment to be employed. Shrimp farmers used to hold animals in nursery ponds for 30 to 60 days, now they try to move them into grow-out ponds in less than 30 days. This reduces stress on the animals and dramatically increases survival rates in the grow-out ponds. Many farms that abandoned nursery ponds have gone back to them, and the results have been surprisingly positive. They're using the old, uncovered, earthen, nursery ponds. World Shrimp Farming pegged Japan's 1992 production of farmed shrimp at 3,000 metric tons, live weight, from 150 intensive and semi-intensive farms with 400 hectares of ponds. In the Kagoshima area of Kyushu, farmers used large, round, land-based tanks and produced 15,000 to 20,000 kilograms per hectare. Later, semi-intensive farms appeared on Japan's southern islands, Okinawa, for example. The Atlantic coast of the peninsula can be thought of as the cold side, and the sea on this coast tends to be clear and cold, with a variety of seaweeds growing along the rocky shoreline. On a hot day, however, this cold water can be very refreshing and is said to be just hospitable to sharks, which prefer warmer waters. They controlled the bird's age, sex, body size and species, and found that the hunted specimen's brains were actually 5% smaller, on average, than the brains of birds that died by other means. The surprising thing is, that if you make a smaller kind of analysis of liver or heart size, there is absolutely no difference there. So this is specific to the brain. The elephant is the largest living land mammal. During its evolution, its skeleton has been greatly altered from the usual mammal design for two main reasons. One is to cope with the great weight of its huge grinding teeth and elongated tusk, making the skull particularly massive. The other is to support the bulk of such a huge body. Two sisters were at a dinner party when the conversation turned to upbringing. The elder sister started to say that her parents had been very strict and that she had been rather frightened of them. Her sister, younger by 2 years, interrupted in amazement. "What are you talking about?" she said. "Our parents were very lenient." Legal writing is usually less discursive than writing in other humanities subjects, and precision is more important than variety. Sentence structure should not be too complex. It is usually unnecessary to make extensive use of adjectives or adverbs, and consistency of terms is often required. A national study into fraud by bookkeepers, employed at small and medium-sized businesses, has uncovered 65 instances of theft in more than 5 years, with more than $31 million stolen. Of the cases identified by the research, 56 involved women and 9 instances involved men. However, male bookkeepers who defrauded their employer stole 3 times, on average, the amount that women stole. Few things in the world produce such amazement as one's first glimpse of the Grand Canyon. At 17 miles wide in some places, it took more than 2 billion years to create this vast wonder, largely through the relentless force of the Colorado River, which runs its 277-mile length a mile beneath the canyon's towering rims. Few things in the world produce such amazement as one's first glimpse of the Grand Canyon. It took around more than 2 billion years to create this vast wonder in some places. 17 miles wide, largely through the relentless force of the Colorado River, which runs 277 miles along its length and a mile beneath its towering rims. The Grand Canyon is 277 miles long, up to 18 miles wide, and attains a depth of over a mile. While the specific geologic processes and timing that formed the Grand Canyon are the subject of debate by geologists, recent evidence suggests the Colorado River established its course through the canyon at least 17 million years ago. The starting point of Bergson's theory is the experience of time and motion. Time is the reality we experience most directly, but this doesn't mean that we can capture this experience mentally. The past is gone and the future is yet to come. The only reality is the present, which is real through our experience. The grid-based infrastructure enables large-scale scientific applications to be run on distributed resources. However, in practice, grid resources are not very easy to use for the end users who have to learn how to generate security credentials. There is an imminent need to provide transparent access to these resources so that the end users are shielded from the complicated details. Tourism is a challenging sector which divides statistics since businesses serving tourists also service local people. Therefore, it is not as straightforward to estimate how much business revenue or jobs are due to tourist expenditure. For any marketing course that requires development of marketing plan, such as marketing management, marketing strategy and segmentation support marketing, this is the only planning handbook that guides students through the step-by-step creation of customized marketing plan, while offering commercial software to aid in the process. For any marketing course that requires the development of a marketing plan, such as marketing management, marketing strategy and principles of marketing, this is the only planning handbook that guides students through step-by-step creation of a customized marketing plan, while offering commercial software to aid in the process. The semiconductor industry has been able to improve the performance of electric systems for more than 4 decades by making ever smaller devices. However, this approach will soon encounter both scientific and technical limits, which is why the industry is exploring a number of alternative device technologies. In multilingual countries, code mixing, the use of more than one variety in the same utterance or sentence, and code switching, the use of different languages or varieties between sentences, is common and natural. Despite its frequency, or perhaps because of it, some scholars and self-appointed guardians of linguistic morality view both code mixing and code switching as a sign of linguistic deficiency. The Japanese tea ceremony is a tour influenced by Buddhism, in which green tea is prepared and served to a small group of guests in a peaceful setting. The ceremony can take as long as 4 hours, and there are many traditional gestures that both the server and the guest must perform. The Japanese tea ceremony is a ritual tour influenced by Buddhism, in which green tea is prepared and served to a small group of guests in a peaceful setting. The ceremony can take as long as 4 hours, and there are many traditional gestures that both the server and the guest must perform. In Japanese, the tea ceremony is a ritual-like formalism, in which green tea is prepared and served to multiple guests in a peaceful setting. The ceremony can take as long as 4 hours, and there are many tradition gestures that the server and the guests must perform. The Japanese tea ceremony evolved under the influence of Zen Buddhism, aims to attain a perfect balance between nature and the human soul. This is done by performing the task of making tea in a series of graceful movements, which when done by a master, are a wonder to watch. Because shonoyu, the Japanese tea ceremony, is closely linked to the appreciation of art, nature and surroundings. Long isolated from Western Europe, Russia developed without participating in the European Reformation, resulting in many Russians taking pride in their unique culture. Russia, as a result, is the most unusual member of European family, if indeed it is European at all. The question is still open to debate, particularly among Russians themselves. The uniquely scented flavor of vanilla is second only to chocolate in popularity on the world's palate. It's also the second most expensive spice after saffron. But highly labor-intensive cultivation methods, and the plant's temperamental life cycle and propagation, mean production on a global scale is struggling to keep up with the increasing demand for the product. Food is one of the most important things you'll ever buy. And yet most people never bother to think about their food and where it comes from. People spend a lot more time worrying about what kind of blue jeans to wear, what kind of video games to play, what kind of computers to buy. Weakness in electronics, auto and gas station sales dragged down overall retail sales last month, but excluding those three categories, retailers enjoyed healthy increases across the board, according to government figures released Wednesday. Moreover, December sales were also revised higher. The Founding Fathers established constitutional protections for the press, because they understood that leaving the watchdog function to partisan politicians wouldn't necessarily serve the public interest. Both sides have too many incentives to preserve the status quo and ignore problems that elude quick fixes. It isn't rare for private equity houses to hire grads fresh out of business school, but times out of 10, the students who nab these jobs are the ones who have private equity experience under their belt before even starting their MBA program. Surprisingly, despite what appear to be infinite variations, all difficult conversations share a common structure. When you're caught up in the details and anxiety of a particularly difficult conversation, this structure is hard to see. But understanding that structure is essential to improving how you handle your most challenging conversations. Solar energy is an excellent source of supplying power to homes and companies. By utilizing solar power, you are not merely protecting the environment from becoming polluted, but you are also preserving the rest of the Earth's natural resources. Capturing solar energy does not contribute any pollution and does not harm the atmosphere. One of the factors why many individuals are still hesitant to make use of solar power is because it is expensive. How quickly is the world's population growing? In the United States and other developed countries, the current growth rate is very low. In most developing countries, the human population is growing at a rate of nearly 3% per second. Because of this bustling growth rate, the human population is well on its way to reaching 9 billion within your lifetime. If bonus or incentive pay schemes work so well for chief executives and bankers, why don't all employees get one? After all, many jobs involve making important decisions or taking risks. Is there anything about corporate decision and financial risks that makes these categories of work special, in terms of how they need to be incentivized and rewarded? In classes, your teachers will talk about topics that you are studying. The information that they provide will be important to know when you take tests. You must be able to take good written notes from what your teacher say. At the end of this year we will launch the Cup-class boats. These will be about twice as powerful as the current boats, and the sailors are down in cockpits, unlike today. A lot of power is being generated by these four grinders that are providing hydraulic power, but energy is being used to control the flying surface. The hydrofoil and is also being used to control the wings and flaps, effectively the engine of what we have. This is what needs to happen on climate change. The world needs to put a price on carbon. The world needs to put a price on carbon emissions and let the market respond. If politicians pretend this can be done without pain, it will probably result in another 5 to 10 years of pretending to take action. Major breeding areas and breeding islands are shown as dark green areas or darts. Open darts represent no breeding records on islands and are also used for offshore sightings from ships or boats. Other areas where species are not meant to be seen are plain pale green, with pale green hatching where records are usually sparse. Augustus was given the powers of an absolute monarch, but he presented himself as the preserver of republican traditions. He treated the Senate or State Council with great respect and was made consul year after year. He successfully reduced the political power of the army by retiring many soldiers, but giving them land or money to keep their loyalty. As to the Industrial Revolution, one cannot dispute today the fact that it has succeeded in inaugurating in a number of countries a level of mass prosperity which was undreamt of in the days preceding it. But, on the immediate impact of the Industrial Revolution, there were substantial divergences among writers. While blue is one of the most popular colors, it is one of the least appetizing, with blue foods rarely occurring naturally. Food researchers say that when humans searched for food, they learned to avoid toxic or spoiled objects, which were often blue, black, or purple. When food dyed blue is served to study subjects, they lose appetite. Blue is the most popular color. Food researchers disagree. When humans searched for food, they learned to avoid toxic or spoiled objects, which were often blue, black, or purple. When food dyed blue is served to study subjects, they lose their appetite. The Ford Company provides plenty of opportunities for its employees. It guarantees not only comfortable and appropriate working conditions, but also many other advantages. Therefore, becoming a part of the Ford Motor Company is always profitable and beneficial. Moreover, it is important to mention that Ford Motors provides its employees with effective and useful services, and takes care of their well-being. Roman writers and orators began to expand their imaginative and intellectual horizons, and refine the Latin language through the study of Greek literature. Early Roman literature had two kinds: the recording and examination of public life and behavior through life stories of famous men, and the particularly Roman art of satirical comedy and drama. Global warming is defined as an increase in the average temperature of the Earth's atmosphere. This trend began in the middle of the 20th century, and is one of the major environmental concerns of scientists and governmental officials worldwide. The changes in temperature result mostly from the effect of increased concentrations of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Such an agreement would include recognition that the world must aim as soon as possible to hold global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, a long-term low-carbon future, 5-year updated action plans that recognize the developing climate reality, and aid to those countries that did little to cause climate change but are most at risk from it. Climate scientists are in no doubt that global warming is almost entirely the result of human activity. Which makes it odd that attempts to predict how things will pan out have paid lip service to human behavior, one of the key factors determining whether a sustainable future is possible. It seems that language appeared from nowhere since no other species have anything resembling human language. However, other animals do possess basic systems for perceiving and producing sounds that enable them to communicate. These systems may have been in place before the appearance of language. Pluto lost its official status as a planet yesterday, when the International Astronomical Union downsized the solar system from 9 to 8 planets. Although there had been passionate debates at the IAU General Assembly meeting in Prague about the definition of a planet, and whether Pluto met the specifications, the audience greeted the decision to exclude it with applause. Pluto is removed from 9-planet International Astronomer Union. Pluto was one of 9 planets recognized to our solar system. But in 2006, it was relegated to the official status of dwarf planet by the International Astronomical Union. It will bring into clear focus once more what is, and what isn't, meant by the term planet. The core of the problem was the immense disparity between the country's productive capacity and the ability of the people to consume. Great innovations in productive techniques during and after the war raised the output of industry beyond the purchasing capacity of U.S. farmers and wage earners. It is difficult to tell whether the speaker approves of Hemingway's lifestyle or not. He was famously macho and spent a lot of time hunting wild animals, going to wars and getting into fights. All these things got into his books, and the speakers think that this is not necessarily a good thing, as it means that too many people prefer to read about his life than read his books. At the beginning of each fiscal year, funds are allocated to each state account in accordance with the university's financial plan. Funds are allocated to each account by object of expenditure. Account managers are responsible for ensuring that adequate funds are available in the appropriate object. Lincoln's apparent radical change of mind about his war power to emancipate slaves was caused by the escalating scope of war, which convinced him that any measure to weaken the Confederacy and strengthen the Union war effort was justifiable as a military necessity. But on May 3, a couple of weeks later, Lincoln issued an executive order calling for 43,000 3-year volunteers for the Army, and also increasing the size of the regular Army and Navy by 40,000 men. Both of these actions were in apparent violation of the Constitution. Although it hails from a remote region of the western Himalayas, this plant now looks entirely at home on the banks of English rivers. Brought to the UK in 1839, it quickly escaped from Victorian gardens and colonised river banks and damp woodlands. Now it is spreading across Europe, New Zealand, Canada and the US. In the Himalayas the plant is held in check by various pets, but take these away and he grows and reproduces unhindered. Although it hails from a remote region of the western Himalayas, This plant now looks entirely at home on the banks of English rivers, and colonized river banks and damp woodlands. In the Himalayas the plant is held in check by various pests, but takes these away and it grows and reproduces unhindered. Now it is spreading across Europe, New Zealand, Canada and the US. In the fast-changing world of modern healthcare, the job of a doctor is more and more like the job of a chief executive. The people who run hospitals and physicians' practices don't just need to know medicine. They must also be able to balance budgets, motivate a large and diverse staff and make a young man from a small provincial town. A man without independent wealth, without powerful family connection and without a university education. Moved to London in the late 1580s, and in a remarkably short time, became the greatest playwright not of his age alone but of all time. How did Shakespeare become Shakespeare? A young man from a small provincial town, a man without independent wealth, without powerful family connections and without a university education, moves to London in the 1580s and becomes a remarkable playwright of all time. How is an achievement of magnitude made? How does Shakespeare become Shakespeare? Although introvert and extrovert personality types differ from one another on various grounds, the major difference between the two is their source of rejuvenation. While for extroverts, this may mean interaction or excursions with friends and family, the same may mean reading a book or listening to music for introverts. Introverts, or those of us with introverted tendencies, tend to recharge by spending time alone. They lose energy from being around people for long periods of time, particularly large crowds. Extroverts, on the other hand, gain energy from other people. Extroverts actually find their energy is sapped when they spend too much time alone. They recharge by being social. Akimbo, this must be one of the odder-looking words in the language. It puzzles us in part because it doesn't seem to have any relatives. What's more, it is now virtually a fossil word, until recently almost invariably found in arms akimbo, a posture in which a person stands with hands on hips and elbows sharply bent outward. Domestication is an evolutionary rather than political development. They were more likely to survive and prosper in an alliance with humans than on their own. Humans provided the animals with food and protection, in exchange for which the animals provided the humans with their milk, eggs and yes, their flesh. The beginning of the 21st century will be remembered not for military conflicts or political events, but for a whole new age of globalization, a flattening of the world. The explosion of advanced technology now means that suddenly knowledge pools and resources have connected all over the planet, leveling the playing field like never before. When countries assess their annual carbon dioxide emissions, they count up their cars and power stations, but bushfires are not included, presumably because they are deemed to be events beyond human control. In Australia, Victoria alone sees several 100,000 hectares burn each year. In both 2004 and the present summer, the figure has been over 1 million hectares. The diversity of human language may be compared to the diversity of the natural world. Just as the demise of plant spices reduces genetic diversity and deprives of humanity or potential medical and biological resources, so extinction of language takes with it a wealth. We all know about bacteria, viruses and microscopic protozoa. We can watch the way that these tiny agents move into our bodies and damage our organs. We have a growing understanding of how our body mounts defensive strategies that fight off these invaders, and have built some clever chemical that can help mount an assault on these bio-villains. Competence in mathematics was another trouble spot. More than half said that their school's graduates are deficient in mathematics. More than 10% of respondents said colleges' graduates are deficient in the subject, while 70% said they are adequate. Ever since I remembered, Father woke up at 5:30 every morning, made us all breakfast and read newspaper. After that he would go to work. He worked as a writer. It was a long time before I realized he did this for a living. Every morning, no matter how late he had been up, my father rose at 5:30, went to his study, wrote for a couple of hours, made us all breakfast, read the paper with my mother, and then went back to work for the rest of the morning. Many years passed before I realized that he did this for a living. First-year university students have designed and built a groundbreaking electric car that recharges itself. 50 students from the University of Sydney's Faculty of Engineering spent 5 months cobbling together bits of plywood, foam and fiberglass to build the Mango concept car. They developed the specifications and hand-built the car. It's a pretty radical design. A 4-wheel drive with a motor in each wheel. This book is no ordinary book, and should be read through from beginning to end. It contains many different adventures, and the path you take will depend on the choice you make along the way. The success or failure of your mission will depend on the decisions you make, so think carefully before choosing. For diplomacy, the starting point must be that globalization requires bridges and removes barriers. A policy of containment is a difficult strategy in the age of the fiber optic cable, the jumbo jet and the satellite dish. There will always be the exception. Such as the murderous regime in Iraq, where the only safe strategy is to keep it in the isolation ward, until it accepts the norms of international behavior. Teenage girls are continuing to outperform boys in English, while the gender gap in achievements in math and science has almost disappeared. The figures show that last year 80% of 14-year-old girls reached at least the expected level 5 in English, compared with 65% of boys. But in math, the girls are just 1% ahead of boys, while in science the difference is 2%. One of the important values of literature is that knowledge is our emotional life, the inner life that good review in their characters often gives us glimpses into some portion of ourselves. We can devote to laugh, cry, tremor, dream, ponder, shriek, or rick, by simply turning a page inside of Turning Our Lives Upside Down. In an attempt to lure new students, leading business schools, including Harvard, Stanford, the University of Chicago and Wharton, have moved away from the unofficial missions and prerequisite of 4 years work experience, and instead have set their sights on recent college graduates, and so-called early career professionals with only a couple of years of work under their belt. The brain is divided into 2 hemispheres, called the left and right hemispheres. Each hemisphere provided a different set of functions, behaviors, and controls. The right hemisphere is often called the creative side of the brain, while the left hemisphere is the logical or analytical side of brain. The brain is divided into its hemispheres by a prominent groove. At the base of this lies the nerve fibers, which enable these 2 halves of the brain to communicate with each other. But the left hemisphere usually controls movement and sensation in the right side of the body, while the right hemisphere similarly controls the left side. Hundreds of millions of American people eat fast food every day, without giving it too much thought, unaware of the subtle and not so subtle ramifications of their purchases. They just grab their tray off the counter, find a table, take a seat, unwrap the paper, and dig in. The whole experience is transitory and soon forgotten. Hundreds of millions of people buy fast food every day, without giving it much thought, unaware of the subtle and not so subtle ramifications of their purchases. They just grasp a hamburger and unwrap it and toss the wrap into the bin. The whole experience is transitory and soon forgotten. Hundreds of millions of people eat fast food every day without giving it much thought. They just unwrap their hamburgers and dig in. An hour or so later, when the burger's all gone and the wrapper's been tossed into the garbage, the whole meal has already been forgotten. Before European explorers had reached Australia, it was believed that all swans were white. Dutch mariner, Antoine Kahn, was the first to be amazed at the sight of Australia's black swans on the Shark Bay in 1636. Explorer Willem de Vlaming captured 2 of these creatures on Australia's Swan River, and returned with them to Europe to prove their existence. Before the discovery of Australia, people in the Old World were convinced that all swans were white, an unassailable belief as it seemed completely confirmed by empirical evidence. The sighting of the first black swan might have been an interesting surprise for a few ornithologists, but that is not where the significance of the story lies. In his landmark account, first published over 20 years ago, the author argues that the ignorance and lethargy of the poor are direct results of the whole situation of economic, social and political domination. By being kept in a situation in which critical awareness and response are practically impossible, the disadvantaged are kept submerged. Exhilarating, exhausting, intense, these are just some of the words used to describe doing an MBA. Everyone's experience in doing MBA is of course different, though denying that it's hard and demanding work whichever course you do. An MBA is one of the fastest growing area of study in the UK, so that must be sustainable benefit from taking this kind of course. exhilarating, exhausting and intense. There are just some of the words used to describe doing an MBA. Everyone's experience of doing MBA is, of course, different through denying that it's hard and a demanding work whichever course you do. MBA is one of the fastest growing areas of studying in the UK, so that must be a sustainable benefit against form in one pain. If you have a chronic disease such as heart disease, diabetes, asthma, back or joint pain, exercise can have important health benefits. However, it is important to talk to your doctor before starting an exercise routine. Your doctor might have advice on what exercises are safe, and any precautions you might need to take while exercising. A unique characteristic of online shopping environments is that they allow vendors to create retail interfaces with highly interactive features. One desirable form of interactivity from a consumer perspective is the implementation of sophisticated tools to assist shoppers in their purchase decisions by customizing the electronic shopping environment to their individual preferences. Although Botswana's economic outlook remains strong, the devastation that AIDS has caused threatens to destroy the country's future. In 2001, Botswana had the highest rate of HIV infection in the world. With the help of international donors, it launched an ambitious national campaign that provided free antiviral drugs to anyone who needed them. And by March 2004, Botswana's infection rate had dropped significantly. Charles Darwin published his paper on the origin of species in 1859. It is one of the most well-known pieces of scientific literature in human history. In the paper, Darwin proposes the theory of natural selection. He states that for any generation of any species, there will always be a struggle for survival. Clementon wanted to see if claims of question dodging actually held up, historically not necessarily in the unique case of Trump. So Clementon analyzed the transcripts of 14 presidential debates, from 1996 to 2012. Overall, he found 51 accusations of question dodging, 26 by Dems, 25 by Republicans. The term supernova was coined in the 1930s by a memorably odd astrophysicist named Fritz Zwicky. Born in Bulgaria and raised in Switzerland, Zwicky came to the California Institute of Technology in the 1920s, and there as once distinguished himself by his abrasive personality and erratic talents. He didn't seem to be outstandingly bright, and many of his colleagues considered him little more than an irritating buffoon. Some people object that in order for the eye to modify, and still remain a useful instrument to its owner, many changes would have had to take place simultaneously. However, it is not necessary to suppose if the modifications were extremely slight and gradual. What we found is that the plant is actually damaged by herbivores like most plants are in nature. And in response to that it secretes sugar from the wound edges, where the herbivores have damaged the plant. Tobias Lortzing is a graduate student at Freie University Berlin and one of the study authors. The quest for a user-friendly copyright regime began a decade ago, when the Hong Kong government launched a public consultation on copyright protection in the digital environment in December 2006. Although this consultation initially sought to address internet-related challenges, such as those caused by peer-to-peer file sharing technology, the reform effort quickly evolved into a more comprehensive digital upgrade of the Hong Kong copyright regime. Fence, humanly erected barrier between two divisions of land, used to mark a legal or other boundary, to keep animals or people in or out, and sometimes as an ornament. In newly settled lands, fences are usually made of materials at hand, for example, stone, earth, or wood. Researchers have found that divorce has different kinds of negative impacts on the planet, including higher demand for resources, and a lower rate of efficiency in the use of household resources. People have been talking about how to protect the environment and combat climate change, but divorce is an overlooked factor that needs to be considered. The next wave of leaders in industrial manufacturing will build an ecosystem that capitalizes on the promise of analytics and connectivity to maximize efficiency for themselves and their customers. They will map out their strategies and prioritize measures that will bring the most value to their business. Starting now with pilot projects, and building greater strengths in data analytics with cross-functional teams of experts. Business school admissions officers said the new drive to attract younger students was in part the result of a realization that they had inadvertently limited their applicant pool by requiring several years' work experience. Talented students who might otherwise have gone to business school instead opted for a law or policy degree because they were intimidated by the expectation of work experience. Nurse sharks are thought to take advantage of dormant fish, which would otherwise be too fast for the sharks to catch. Although their small mouths limit the size of prey, the sharks have large throat cavities which are used as a sort of bellows valve. In this way, nurse sharks are able to suck in their prey. Nurse sharks are also known to graze algae and coral. In 1815, on the island of Sumbawa in Indonesia, a handsome and long quiescent mountain named Tambora exploded spectacularly, killing 100,000 people with its blast and associated tsunamis. No one living now has ever seen such fury. Tambora was far bigger than anything any living human has experienced. Studying abroad is a very popular option for students who come from a wealthy family. Most people believe that overseas experience provides a deeper understanding of cultures and develops communication skills. While this may be true, not all of these experiences are useful for finding a job. Employers tend to value interpersonal skills and industry knowledge more than cultural background. Researchers gathered 160 uncaffeinated adults, people who consumed less than 500 milligrams of caffeine per week. These decaf subjects looked at pictures of various objects, then took either a placebo or a pill containing 200 milligrams of caffeine. That's roughly the amount you'd get from 2 cups of coffee. Written examinations are a fact of life for most high school and university students. However, recent studies have shown that this traditional form of assessment may not be an accurate indicator of academic performance. Tests have shown that many students experience anxiety during exam weeks, which leads to poorer results. As a result, some learning institutions are replacing exams with alternative assessments, such as group work and oral presentations. Such cross-protection is usually seen between two animals. But Gore studies the same sort of mutualism in microbes. He and his team demonstrated the first experimental example of that cross-protective relationship in drug-resistant microbes, using two strains of antibiotic-resistant E. coli bacteria, one resistant to ampicillin, the other to chloramphenicol. The primary application we're targeting at first is to give people a decision aid during rehabilitation, following an acute knee injury, to help them understand when they can perform particular activities, and when they can move to different intensities of particular activity. A useful thing to take crack at. Where there are effects, there are often side effects. The car is a boon to mobility, but can lead to obesity, deaths and pollution. Burning fossil fuel may keep economies going, but wrecks the climate in the long run. In a similar way, there are side effects to information technology in education settings, from childcare to the classroom to the lecture hall and beyond. In comparing material with non-material culture, the first being the objects and technologies we create, and the second our customs, beliefs and attitudes, the speaker gives greater emphasis to the material culture. He gives the example of the development of genetic science and the benefits it has brought to mankind, despite a fair amount of opposition. The living room is the most used part that withholds most of the traffic coming in and out of the house. It is highly recommended that the flooring should be strong enough that it can endure all such amendments done with your furniture, or to the increasing and decreasing ratio of visitors. For this purpose, you can opt for hardwood flooring. The current measure has remained virtually unchanged over the past 30 years. Yet during that time, there have been marked changes in the nation's economy and society and in public policies that have affected families' economic well-being, which are not reflected in the measure. It was found that while many companies express interest in Jacobson's use case approach, actual scenario usage often falls outside what is described in textbooks and standard methodologies. Users therefore face significant scenario management problems not yet addressed adequately in theory or practice, and are demanding solutions to these problems. The problem begins with the alphabet itself. Building a spelling system for English using letters that come from Latin, despite the two languages not sharing exactly the same set of sounds, is like building a playroom using an IKEA office set. Moods may also have an effect on how information is processed, by influencing the extent to which judges rely on pre-existing, internal information, or focus on new, external information. Positive moods promote more holistic and top-down processing style, while negative moods recruit more stimulus-driven and bottom-up processing. Modern buildings have to achieve certain performance requirements, at least to satisfy those of building codes, to provide a safe, healthy, and comfortable environment. However, these conditioned environments demand resources in energy and materials, which are both limited in supply, to build and operate. In spite of the spectacularly high quality of life for the vast majority of the people who live in the European Union, its inhabitants seem obsessed by the region's relative decline in the world. Slow economic growth rates and high unemployment have reinforced the impression that Europe is unhappy with today and unsure of tomorrow. Three professors from Hamburg University's medical faculty traveled last month to Ingeborg's sitting room in East Berlin to test her on the work she carried out in pre-war Germany. They were impressed, and a special ceremony took place at Hamburg University Medical Center on Tuesday, in which she finally received the PhD that the Nazis stole from her. This finding is understandable in certain cases, in spite of its high significance, that is because energy efficiency of building operation just represents a single aspect of sustainability. If countries can specialize in certain goods, they can benefit from economies of scale and lower average cost. This is especially true in the industry with high fixed costs or that require a high level of investment. The benefits of the economy of scale will ultimately lead to lower prices for consumers and greater efficiency for exporting firms. The numbers on the US student debt, after all, are truly staggering. The average 2015 U.S. university graduates who took out loans to help pay for tuition enters the workforce with $35,000 in student debt. In the U.S., total student debt exceeds $1.15 trillion, dwarfing, for instance, the nation's credit card debt. The latest scientific evidence on the nature and strength of the links between diet and chronic diseases is examined and discussed in detail in the following sections of this report. This section gives an overall view of the current situation and trends in chronic diseases at the global level. First discovered in 2007, fast radio bursts continue to defy explanation. These cosmic chirps last 1,000th of a second. The characteristics of the radio pulses suggested that they came from galaxies billions of light-years away. However, new works points to a much closer origin: flaring stars within our own galaxy. One of the unidentifiable objects in this study lies just outside Centaurus at NGC 5128, an elliptical galaxy located about 12 million light-years from Earth. The other is a globular cluster of stars found just outside NGC 4636, another elliptical galaxy located 47 million light-years from Earth in the constellation Virgo. A constellation is an area on the celestial sphere in which a group of stars forms an imaginary outline or pattern, typically representing an animal, mythological person or creature, or an inanimate object. The origins of the earliest constellations likely go back to prehistory. The insults and criticism were not unexpected. What was surprising was people's enthusiasm about the competition. Thousands have participated in the discussion. Who do you think is the most glamorous person? A biotechnologist who led his company in international research, an ordinary welder who gained international fame through his work, or a photographer complimented widely for a series of photos? The Office of Personnel Management was the target of the attack, but data from nearly every government agency was stolen. U.S. investigators say they believe Chinese hackers were behind the breach. While the Republican field is packed with male candidates, so far, some of the sharpest Clinton critiques have come from women. Democrats successfully campaigned on an alleged GOP-perpetrated war on women in 2012, but faltered in 2014 when they tried the same tactic. With Hillary Clinton as the likely Democratic nominee, the fight for women voters will be a central part of the 2016 campaign. As far as politics go, the responses are just as varied. Mitigation is common and calls for a reduction of emissions and less reliance on fossil fuels. Coal-burning power plants are now replaced with hydraulic power plants, and electrical cars have been replaced with gasoline-efficient cars. Many people, however, feel that this is not enough. The border itself between Mexico and United States is fraught with a mix of urban and desert terrain and spans over 1,900 miles. Both the uninhabited areas of the border and urban areas are where the most drug trafficking and illegal crossings take place. Crime is prevalent in urban cities like El Paso, Texas, and San Diego, California. Free trade is an economic policy under which the government does not interfere with trade. No tariffs are applied to imports or exports, and people are allowed to trade goods and services as they please. Supply and demand dictates the prices for which goods and services sell, and are the only factors that determine how resources are allocated in society. Unlike the United Kingdom, which has taken a relatively restrictive approach to the possession of arms, the United States has taken a more lenient approach. In the United States, 3 models have evolved regarding the interpretation of the meaning of the right to bear arms as delineated in the Second Amendment. Trade unions originated in Europe during the Industrial Revolution. Because of the machinery that had become commonplace, skilled labor became less in demand, so employers had nearly all of the bargaining power. Employers mistreated the workers and paid them too little for the work they did. Trade unions were organized that would help in the improvement of working conditions. Unions take the power out of the employer's hands on many issues. There are examples of cases where workers were engaging in sexual or racial harassment, but were protected by their unions and allowed to keep their jobs. Poor workers and excellent workers often receive the same pay and raises, giving no reason for a person to work harder than necessary at their job. A smoking ban is a public policy that includes criminal laws and health regulations that prohibit smoking in certain public places and workspaces. There are varying definitions of smoking employed in this legislation. The strictest definitions define smoking as being the inhalation of any tobacco substance, while the loosest define smoking as possessing any lit tobacco product. Welfare has a special political meaning to the United States because it refers to how the poor receive financial aid. In comparison, welfare services are regarded as a universal right in other regions like Europe, where it is believed that all citizens should be able to obtain a minimal level of social support and well-being. The University of Liverpool is a public university based in the city of Liverpool, England. Founded as a college in 1881, it gained its royal charter in 1903 with the ability to award degrees and is also known to be one of the 6 original red brick civic universities. It comprises 3 faculties organized into 35 departments and schools. The ritual of the state opening of Parliament still illustrates the basis of the British Constitution. The sovereignty of the royal family has passed to the sovereignty of Parliament, leaving the monarchy with the trappings of power, while prime ministers are still denied the kind of status that is given to American and French presidents. But the debate could not be resolved, because no one was able to ask the crucial questions in a form in which they could be pursued productively. Recent discoveries in molecular biology, however, have opened up prospects for a resolution of the debate. Rather, in their day-by-day tactical maneuvers, these senior executives rely on what is vaguely termed intuition to manage a network of interrelated problems that require them to deal with ambiguity, inconsistency, novelty, and surprise, and to integrate action into the process to thinking. Thompson recognized and exploited all the ingredients of a successful amusement ride, writes Judith A. Adams in the American amusement park industry. His coasters combined an appearance of danger with actual safety, thrilled riders with exhilarating speed, and allowed the public to intimately experience the Industrial Revolution's new technologies of gears, steel, and dazzling electric lights. Born into a theatrical family, Charles Spencer Chaplin's father died of drink, while his mother, unable to bear the poverty, suffered from bouts of insanity. From a childhood of grinding poverty in the South London slums, Chaplin found an escape in his early debut on the music hall stage, followed by his lucky break in America. Australia has one of the world's most important mining industries. It is a major exporter of coal, iron ore, gold and copper, and is self-sufficient in all minerals bar petroleum. Since the first discoveries, the coal in 1798, mineral production has risen every year in the decade to 1992 it doubled. Studies funded by the soft drink industry are more likely to mask links to obesity and type 2 diabetes, according to a new report. He added that biases in industry-funded studies were not usually due to poor methodology, but due to inherent problems in their design, including poor choice of comparators and problems with the way data is analyzed and reported. Passion and the ability to identify talents are the two crucial aspects for success. Passion allows you to sustain and persevere during the process because if you will have fun in doing it. But if you don't really love what you do, you are going to give up because things can be very tough. Passion is what makes success difficult. To find graduate admission not overlooked, each of the university schools and colleges admits students to its own program. For information about specific graduate degree, graduate applications, graduate admission requirements and procedures, graduate scholarship, and papers for your application, visit individual school website. Many people believe that employers discriminate against older people because youths have more energy and creativity. This is not true. The main reason for hiring younger workers is payroll. In most countries, your salary is dependent on how many years of work experience you have. It is far more cost-efficient to hire postgraduates, fresh out of university, than senior staff with over 20 years of industry knowledge. In the spirit of comparative immunology, Baker and her colleagues looked at how another mammal, the black flying fox, a type of bat, handles infections. They sequenced its immunity genes and observed the immune response in normal bat cells. And they found that, unlike us, the bats always have interferons on patrol, meaning the proteins do not wait to be activated by invaders. The quest for a user-friendly copyright regime began a decade ago when the Hong Kong government launched a public consultation on copyright protection in the digital environment in December 2006. Although this consultation initially sought to address internet-related challenges, such as those caused by peer-to-peer file sharing technology, the reform effort quickly evolved into a more comprehensive digital upgrade of the Hong Kong copyright regime. By beginning so early, he knows that he has plenty of time to thoroughly do all the work he can be expected to do. All his work having been finished in good time, he has a long interval of rest in the evening before the timely hour when he goes to bed. After a sound night's rest, he rises early next morning in good health and spirits for the labors of a new day. The great advantage of early rising is the head start it gives us in our day's work. The early riser has done a large amount of hard work before other men even get out of bed. In the early morning, the mind is fresh, and there are few sounds or other distractions. In many cases, the early riser also finds time to take some exercise in the fresh morning air. The indigenous or aboriginal peoples of Ontario have lived in the land of sparkling water for at least 7,000 years. Europeans first arrived in Ontario in the 1600s and started building trading posts and forts. The first European colonists and settlers were from France and the British Isles. But by the 20th century, immigrants from all over Europe, Asia, Africa, and South America were coming to Ontario. Botanic gardens are scientific and cultural institutions established to collect, study, exchange and display plants for research and for the education and enjoyment of the public. There are major botanic gardens in each capital city. Zoological parks and aquariums are primarily engaged in the breeding, preservation and display of native and exotic fauna in captivity. Scientists know little about how exactly it works, especially when it comes to complex functions like memory formation. Research is more advanced in animals, but experiments on humans are hard. Yet, even today, some parts of the brain, like the motor cortex, are better understood. Nor is complete knowledge always needed. Machine learning can recognize patterns of neural activity. The caterpillars that feed on trees are trying to match the hatching of their eggs to the timing of bud burst. The caterpillars want to feed on the juiciest and the least chemically protected leaves. And it's not just the caterpillars, of course, that are important. But the knock-on effect is on nesting birds, which are also trying to hatch their chicks at the same time that there's the maximum number of caterpillars. Rice took a stab at settling the argument with a meta-analysis, a study of studies, on whether people can really perceive better than CD quality sound. He analyzed data from 18 studies, including more than 400 participants and nearly 13,000 listening tests. Overall, listeners picked out the better than CD quality track 52.3% of the time. Statistically significant, if not all that impress. The number one biggest difference between the bacteria in your body and the cells making up your body are these tiny cellular components called organelles. You've actually learned a lot about organelles in other lessons without knowing it. Organelles are simply membrane-bound compartments within a cell, such as the nucleus, mitochondria, chloroplasts, Golgi, and endoplasmic reticulum. Your body is composed of trillions of cells, lots of different types of cells that make up different organs and other parts of your body. Your body is also where 10 times that number of bacteria call home sweet home. But don't be afraid, these bacteria do more good than harm to you. All cells share some common characteristics that make them living things. All organisms are composed of cells, the basic fundamental unit of life. They contain DNA as a heritable genetic material, and they can reproduce. They transcribe DNA into RNA and translate RNA into proteins on ribosomes. They can also regulate transport across a cell membrane, and require chemical energy for some cellular processes. Howard believed that all clouds belonged to 3 distinct groups: cumulus, stratus and cirrus. He added a 4th category, nimbus, to describe a cloud in the act of condensation into rain, hail or snow. It is by observing how clouds change color and shape that weather can be predicted, and as long as the first 3 of cloud keep their normal shape, there won't be any rain. The co-evolutionary relationship between cows and grass is one of nature's underappreciated wonders. It also happens to be the key to understanding just about everything about modern meat. For the grasses, which have evolved to withstand the grazing of ruminants, the cow maintains and expands their habitat by preventing trees and shrubs from gaining a foothold and hogging the sunlight. As we progress into the 21st century, communications are becoming faster and faster. Think of the millions of different media images you are bombarded with every day. It is just as important to be able to read and make sense of these images as it has been to be able to read ordinary text. Delone and McLean's model has been criticized by some authors. Indeed, this model is specific to contexts of voluntary use of information technology. The usage variable remains a success variable of information systems if the user himself decides to adopt or reject the technology. However, for mandatory uses, such as for ERP systems, the use of the technology is obvious. This study marks the first time scientists have linked dike formation to large, damaging earthquakes, and Warthia is looking back through history for more examples. She says researchers will never be able to predict exactly when an earthquake might strike after a dike construction. But at least now, researchers and rift zone residents know they're not just in for bangs, they may also be in for shudders. Dolphins, whales and porpoises are all social animals, but some species are more sociable than others. This depends on the environment because a species adopts the lifestyle most suitable for this. Among dolphins, forming groups makes it easier for them to find food, reproduce and gain knowledge. They are safer too, because dolphins can communicate danger when there are threats around. The initial thud comes from when those dorsal bursae collide. And the reverberation results from the vibrations that linger when the tissues pull apart. But Thode the younger says the bursae have to be somewhat sticky for the clapping together and snapping apart to produce a noise with the correct loudness and pitch. That stickiness comes courtesy of the mucus. You may have heard of the new fad known as ecotourism. This means tourism which is environmentally friendly and conscious about conserving the environment. The key is to minimize the physical, social and behavioral impacts of overseas travel. Tour groups will often work with local and indigenous communities to design respectful and memorable programs for visitors. Electronic discourse is one form of interactive electronic communication. In this study, we reserve the term for the two-directional texts, in which one person using a keyboard writes language that appears on the sender's monitor and is transmitted to the monitor of a recipient, who responds by keyboard. In the past, naming English as a separate subject seemed relatively easy. The textbook selected and graded items of language which were put into context and then practiced intensively. New items were carefully controlled so that the student could cope quite easily. Now that English is used as a medium of instruction, however, all this has changed. The English Revolution has been interpreted in several ways by historians, as a fight between the aristocratic Cavaliers, who were open to life, and the serious Puritans, as a battle for power between Parliament and the monarchy over the rights of Englishmen that had been going on for centuries, and as a class war similar to the French Revolution, of which it was a forerunner. There are three main interpretations of the English Revolution. The longest-lasting interpretation was that the revolution was the almost inevitable outcome of an age-old power struggle between Parliament and Crown. The second sees it as a class struggle and a lead-up to the French and other revolutions. A recent trend in the entertainment world is to adapt classic works of literature for either TV or movies. One argument is that this is to everyone's benefit, as it introduces people to works they might otherwise never have, but is rarely done successfully. Historically, what has been used to estimate bats has been photographic estimates, visual estimates, mark recapture estimates, and those have been highly prone to bias. Newer technology, like thermal imaging cameras, is accurate, but expensive. So at a time of epic bat mortality due to, for example, the fungal white nose syndrome that's wiping out bats in Canada and the US, in the past 2 centuries, there has been a dramatic change in the role of food and eating in Australian public consciousness. Public discussion of food was largely confined to matters of supply, distribution and price. Towards the end of the 19th century, some newspapers were offering regular columns of advice on housekeeping topics, including menu planning and recipes. There are perhaps 3 ways of looking at furniture. Some people see it as purely functional and useful, and don't bother themselves with aesthetics. Others see it as essential to civilized living and concern themselves with design and how the furniture will look in a room. In other words, function combined with aesthetics, and yet others see furniture as a form of art. New research shows that during the global financial crisis, workers who stayed in the jobs did not reduce their working hours. Despite claims that cuts in hours prevented job losses, the study found that life of people who remained employed stayed relatively unchanged. Beauty contests, whether it's Miss Universe or Miss Teen International, are demeaning to women and out of sync with the times. Opponents say that they are nothing more than symbols of decline. Since Australians Jennifer Hawkins and Lauren Eagle were crowned Miss Universe and Miss Teen International respectively, there has been a dramatic increase in interest in beauty pageants in this country. While killing gorillas is already illegal in the country, declaring the subspecies as critically endangered would probably bring more funding and support for saving it. Protecting the entirety of the gorilla's 7,700 square mile territory would no doubt prove impossible. But Dr. Plumptree and his colleagues are talking with the government and community leaders about establishing 2 new protected areas that would encompass 60% of the remaining gorilla's habitat. But they did find something that had a much bigger impact on wildlife: habitat quality. The best predictor of wildlife abundance was not human activity, but factors like forest connectivity, nearby housing density, and the amount of adjacent agriculture. The results were published in the Journal of Applied Ecology. As a historian, if you really want to understand the sensibilities of those who lived in the past, you must be like a novelist and get into the skins of your characters and think and feel as they do. You are asked to imagine what it's like to be a peasant in medieval times, asking the sort of questions a peasant might ask. It's not that human activities didn't impact wildlife at all, of course. Heavily hunted species, like white-tailed deer, grey squirrels, and raccoons, were photographed somewhat less often in hunted areas. Coyotes showed up more often in hunted areas. While most species didn't avoid hiking trails, the predators actually preferred them. Some people are at higher risk of developing obesity because they possess genetic variants that affect how the brain processes sensory information and regulates feeding and behavior. The findings support a growing body of evidence that obesity is a disease whose roots are in the brain. Currently, integration is increasingly needed in the business environment. This need emerges from the efficiency and synergy requirements necessary in a complex and turbulent environment. In other words, integration is needed to facilitate coordination, which is again related to the building of competitive advantage. So why not switch on those interferons 24/7 in humans? Well, in us, they also tend to cause lots of inflammation and cell damage. Like the symptoms you feel from the flu, a lot of that is your immune system's fault. But the key might be to do as the bats do. If we can just skew the response of our immune system, so it triggers an antiviral response without the pro-inflammatory effects, then we might have something we can work with in terms of a novel therapeutic for humans. Bats have long been known to harbor disease. So it would be fitting if they also taught us how to fight it. The situation is similar to a pregnant woman that has twin babies in her belly. Avi Loeb of the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. He's proposing the idea in a paper that's been accepted for publication in the Astrophysical Journal Letters. Life expectancy has increased dramatically in the last century. Most people these days will live for over 70 years. This is more than double the lifespan of the average human in the 17th century. We can attribute our longevity to advances in medicine and lifestyle. While everyone agrees that living longer is wonderful, overpopulation is becoming a serious environmental concern. The researchers think that long-distance flyers, such as the American golden plover and the white-rumped sandpiper, picked up the spores while lining their nests. Then when the birds arrive in new places, they molt, leaving behind the feathers and their precious cargo to start growing again at the other end of the world. It seems that when it comes to love, men and women are designed to misconstrue, misread, and misunderstand one another and themselves. You discover that in fact they make good sense. Being a deluded romantic is often the best way to make a good biologically successful choice about a potential partner on the basis. The best comparison is likely a magnetar, a young neutron star with a powerful magnetic field, the researchers said. Magnetars also produce bright X-ray flares. While magnetars are thought to be young stars, the two flaring objects in this study reside near elliptical galaxies, which contain older stars. So the objects are likely too old to be magnetars, the researchers said. The researchers said that the best comparison is likely a magnetar, a young neutron star with a powerful magnetic field. Magnetars also produce bright X-ray flares. While magnetars are thought to be young stars, the two flaring objects in this study reside near elliptical galaxies, which contain older stars. So the objects are likely too old to be magnetars. The speaker is a marine biologist who became interested in the strandlopers, an ancient people who lived on the coastline, because of their connection to the sea. Their way of life intrigued him. As a child he had spent a lot of time by the sea, exploring and collecting things. So he began to study them, and discovered some interesting information about their way of life, how they hunted, what tools they used, and so on. Marriage is a big step in anyone's life, and there is an argument to be made against getting married too early. As any newlywed couple knows, there is a huge amount of financial pressure associated with marriage. Firstly, the wedding reception and honeymoon will cost you an arm and a leg. Then there's the matter of home loans, rent and energy bills. Big brands, often inadvertently, are helping fund the websites at the center of a growing controversy over misinformation on the internet. Well-known brands' appearance on fake news sites reflects the complexity of online advertising, where computers can place a different ad each time a user clicks on a web page. For the purposes of argument, culture is divided into material and non-material, and the speaker's aim is to show how they both affect each other. Material developments in tools and technology can affect non-material culture, our customs and beliefs, and the other way around. Genetics is used as an example, as it has changed the way we think about life, but also our beliefs have affected its rate of development. A mental illness is a health problem that significantly affects how a person feels, thinks, behaves, and interacts with other people. People who experience mental illnesses and their family and friends suffer a great deal due to these illnesses. According to the World Health Organization, depression will be one of the biggest health problems worldwide by the year 2020. Usually, age is determined by physical characteristics, such as teeth or bones. Great, if you have a body. Researchers have tried unsuccessfully to use blood. But in this study, the scientists used immune cells called T cells. T cells recognize invaders through receptors that match molecules on bacteria, viruses, even tumors. The cellular activity that produces these receptors also produces a type of circular DNA molecule as a byproduct. Britain, then, as slower to create and develop a police force than the rest of Europe. France had one long before. Indeed, the word police is taken from the French. This fact was not unimportant, as the very idea of a police force was seen as foreign, that is, French, and particularly undesirable, and was generally regarded as a form of oppression. Scientific studies show that by age 3, there is a gap in brain development between kids who are read to aloud and those who are not, and children from low-income families are disproportionately impacted by this gap. Making sure all parents know the importance of reading aloud to their children is critical to closing the achievement gap. The physical location of a restaurant in the competitive landscape of the city has long been known as a major factor in its likely success or failure. Once restaurants are established in such environments, they can do little about their location. All they can do is work to improve customer access to their premises. Restaurateurs often do this by engaging in battles with local authorities about car parking. Study author Samuel Sheehan, a materials scientist, says this smart glass is cheaper than others, and uses minimal power, much less, for example, than something like a curling iron. And since it's flexible and foldable, he says it could even be used for things like camouflage uniforms, to switch, for example, from green and brown to white and grey. The shuttle was designed to be a space truck. It's a multi-purpose vehicle. We've done a tremendous number of different things with it. It's the most versatile space vehicle that has ever been built. We've used it to launch satellites. We've used it to repair satellites in orbit and put them back into orbit. We've used it to capture satellites and bring them back to Earth for repair. The second group that is particularly vulnerable are night shift workers. And the third group that is particularly vulnerable are people with sleep disorders, particularly sleep apnea. 1 out of 3 men and 1 out of 6 women have sleep apnea. And yet, 85% are undiagnosed and untreated. And it more than doubles the risk of crashes. Social media are playing an increasingly important role as information sources for travelers. The goal of this study is to investigate the extent to which social media appear in search engine results in the context of travel-related searches. It also provides evidence for challenges faced by traditional providers of travel-related information. This study tracked about 1,000 adults in the United States, and they ranged in age from 34 to 93, and they started the study by asking, "How much stress have you experienced in the last year?" They also asked, "How much time have you spent helping out friends, neighbors, people in your community?" And then they used public records for the next 5 years to find out who died. The free market is extremely competitive, and companies are constantly trying to gain an edge over their rivals. Merchandising and brand image play a major role in attracting customers, but they often lead to overpackaging. This is a serious problem, since most packaging these days are made of plastics which are not biodegradable. Some people blame the manufacturers for their blatant disregard, while others point the finger at consumers. This year the National Environmental Science Competition received excellent undergraduate and postgraduate entries from all across the country, with a wide range of projects. We are delighted that our awards are encouraging exciting and valuable projects that go beyond research and analysis to develop solutions for a number of key problems. The student's reading in his own subject slows down, and his comprehension becomes less secure. He expresses himself slowly and often fails to convey his ideas exactly. He is disappointed to find that under pressure he makes a lot of unnecessary mistakes in areas where he knows the correct language forms. The prejudice against too good employees is pervasive. Companies tend to prefer an applicant who is a perfect fit over someone who brings more intelligence, education, or experience than needed. On the surface, this bias makes sense. Studies have consistently shown that employees who consider themselves overqualified exhibit higher levels of discontent. On a field trip to the Amazon in 1807, 19th-century explorer Alexander von Humboldt witnessed a group of horses lead through a muddy pool filled with electric eels, which he described as dramatically leaping up to attack the intruders. But scientists have doubted the story. An illustration of Alexander von Humboldt's story of the battle between the horses and electric eels. In such an environment, warfare is no longer purely directed against the military potential of adversarial states. It is rather directed at infiltrating all areas of their societies and to threaten their existences. The comparatively easy access to weapons of mass destruction, in particular relatively low-cost biological agents, is of key concern. The authors noted causality of risks and benefits cannot be established for either with the research currently available, as they are largely based on observational data. Further research is needed to quantify the risk-benefit balance for coffee consumption, as well as identify which of coffee's many active ingredients, or indeed the combination of such, that could be inducing these health benefits. Every generation inevitably believes that the clothes, manners and speech of the following one have deteriorated. We would therefore expect to find a respect for conservative language in every century and every culture, and in literate societies, a reverence for the language of the best authors of the past. Promoting active lifestyles can help us address some of the important challenges facing the UK today. Increasing physical activity has the potential to improve the physical and mental health of the nation, reduce all-cause mortality and improve life expectancy. It can also save money by significantly easing the burden of chronic disease on the health and social care services. There's a glimmer of hope for frogs and other amphibians that are being wiped out by a lethal disease. Some now seem to be evolving resistance to the killer chytrid fungus. In Panama, 9 affected species have virtually recovered to previous levels. Based on experimental evidence, physicists publish revolutionary new theory on brain learning that contradicts the most common assumption in neuroscience, will transform our understanding of brain function, and open new horizons for advanced deep learning algorithms. In the largest study of its kind, 9 novel genes for osteoarthritis have been discovered by scientists from the Wellcome Sanger Institute and their collaborators. Results of the study, published today in Nature Genetics, could open the door to new targeted therapies. As we get older, our endurance declines, in part because our blood vessels lose some of their capacity to deliver oxygen and nutrients to muscle tissue. A research team has now found that it can reverse this age-related endurance loss in mice. The slow fade of radioactive elements following a supernova allows astrophysicists to study them at length. But the universe is packed full of flash in the pan-transient events lasting only a brief time, so quick and hard to study they remain a mystery. If you keep a close eye on an MRI scan of the brain, you'll see a wave pass through the entire brain like a heartbeat once every few seconds. This ultra-slow rhythm was recognized decades ago, but no one quite knew what to make of it. Students whose circadian rhythms were out of sync with their class schedules, say, night owls taking early morning courses, received lower grades due to social jet lag, a condition in which peak alertness times are at odds with work, school or other demands. Though their purpose and function are still largely unknown, mirror neurons in the brain are believed by some neuroscientists to be central to how humans relate to each other. Deficiencies in mirror neurons might also play a role in autism and other disorders affecting social skills. In the last decades of the 18th century, the losers seriously outnumbered the winners. Those who were fortunate enough to occupy the upper levels of society celebrated their good fortune by living a hedonistic life of gambling, parties and alcohol. A 30-year-old transgender woman has become the first officially recorded to breastfeed her baby. An experimental 3.5-month treatment regimen, which included hormones, a nausea drug and breast stimulation. Once sunflowers bloom, their back-and-forth motion ceases, and they typically point toward the rising sun. To see if facing east was beneficial to the mature plants, the researchers rotated some sunflowers so they were facing west, then recorded how many bees and other insects visited the plants. Buttercups get their bright color from yellow pigments in the petal's surface layer. But the petal's shiny gloss is due to the double layer of air just beneath the surface. This reflectivity is what turns people's chins yellow when they hold a flower underneath. Just how many you should remove comes down to a delicate balance. The more suckers your plant has, the more opportunities it will have to flower and make fruit. But all this growth can use a lot of energy, which may mean you get smaller tomatoes. It has long been known that insects such as pollinators and pests can distinguish between plants by the unique bouquet of chemicals they release. What's new is the idea that plants use their emissions to talk among themselves. The invention of weapons may have leveled the playing field, because dominant men were no longer able to fend off competitors who were weaker but armed. That alliance helped social stability. If a few men monopolize all the women, that leaves a lot of disgruntled bystanders. The most popular varieties of tea, including black tea, green tea, oolong tea, white tea, and chai, all come from the leaves of the evergreen shrub Camellia sinensis, otherwise known as the tea tree. In the Namibia desert of southern Africa, where annual rainfall can be as little as 2 millimeters a year, drought-resistant head-stander beetles make up a large chunk of the endemic biodiversity. They survive by basking in the mists that wash in from the Atlantic Ocean. Could local authorities impose such measures today? Probably not. Even so, the legacy of the moral reform of the late 1800s and 1900s lives on today. Because of it, the British have come to expect a system which is competent, fair to all and free from corruption. Simple living sets my heart on higher thoughts. There is a need to follow simplicity in our life. In today's world of increasing pomp and show, when everybody is joining the rat race of displaying his wealth, we should prefer to live simply, without any artificiality. To see whether the sunflower's daily swings were tipped off by environmental cues or driven by an internal clock, the researchers rigged up a growth chamber with a row of lights that turned on and off sequentially, mimicking the movement of the sun. All plants grow thanks to dome-shaped bundles of cells called meristems that make new tissue. The main shoot of a determinate tomato plant doesn't grow upwards indefinitely. After a while, its meristem switches into reproductive mode, makes a flower. It sounds far-fetched, but since John Wyndham's book was published in 1951, one aspect of this fiction has proved to be science fact: plants do talk to one another. If you stroll through a forest and take a deep breath, you can smell the words. Take a moment before you plant a mix of generic wildflower seeds in your garden. If you live in or near a natural area and the seed mix you use is from elsewhere, your wildflowers may escape and compete or hybridize with local wild populations. Chronic dream deprivation isn't just a problem for people with small children. Going to bed drunk or stoned, taking various medications, or even just using an alarm to wake up in the morning can all leave your dreams smothered. That might sound like a trivial complaint. We tend to think of dream sleep as unimportant, the poor relative of vital and restorative deep sleep. But now it seems that dreams are much more than mystical nighttime adventures. It will take an audacious mission to reach Titan. But that is exactly what is in the works. The plan is to send a souped-up, sensor-packed drone to hopscotch across its surface in search of life not at all as we know it. It's difficult to focus your gaze on an object when your eyes are on opposite sides of your head. When European starlings want to focus their gaze, they do so in a unique way, rapidly bobbing their heads from side to side so both eyes get a look. The remains of dozens of fortified villages, built before the arrival of Europeans, have been found in a relatively remote region of the Amazon. It seems the southern periphery of the Amazon was home to 1 million people before 1500 AD, far more than assumed. Parents can communicate their personal feelings about undesirable programs, both by discouraging their children from watching them and by writing to their local television station or to the program's sponsors. The public does have a voice. Clearly, not all programs need please everybody. Each tube-shaped microbot is a sandwich of 3 materials. A graphene outer layer, which binds to heavy metals. A middle layer of nickel, which gives the bots magnetic polarity, so they can be pulled through wastewater with magnets. And platinum inside for propulsion. Just add a bit of peroxide to the wastewater, and it'll react with the platinum to form water and oxygen bubbles. Trump has threatened to declare China a currency manipulator, but experts say he has little legal or economic basis to take such a step. He has also threatened to impose a tariff of up to 45% on Chinese imports if Beijing doesn't behave, a move that could lead to a trade war and damage the economies of both nations. To understand the past you have to be able, as far as possible, to think as the people in the period you are studying thought. The example of what it must have been like to be a peasant in the Middle Ages is used. However, sensibilities change over time and we can't completely throw off the mentality of the present. A university is not a business. More precisely, a not-for-profit college or university is significantly different than a for-profit business. A university has no owners, it is a public trust. Without owners, it has no one to pay dividends to, and no one for whom it must maximize its profits. A business has a single overriding goal, the maximization of return for the owners. The coastal wetlands have environmental and economic importance. Wetlands provide natural wealth. They have important filtering capabilities. As the runoff water passes, they retain excess nutrients and some pollutants. They maintain water flow during dry periods. Thousands of people depend on groundwater for drinking. They act as natural sponges of flood waters and contain soil erosion. Preparation of the abstract is an intellectual effort requiring general familiarity with the subject to highlight the author's argument, skill and experience. Consequently, a considerable amount of qualified manpower that could be used to an advantage in other ways must be diverted to the task of facilitating the information. The preparation of abstracts is an intellectual effort, requiring general familiarity with the subject. To bring out the salient points of an author's argument calls for skill and experience. Consequently, a considerable amount of qualified manpower that could be used to advantage in other ways must be diverted to the task of facilitating access to information. Kinderman says he thinks the compound could be a win-win for the planet and the animals. You know, the methane is kind of a waste product. And this energy, instead of losing it for the animal, it can be reused for the animal in terms of performance, and at the same time, we are doing something for greenhouse gas emission and climate change. Northcote Parkinson, a British writer, formulated Parkinson's rule: work expands to fill the time allotted to it, or, conversely, the amount of work completed is in inverse proportion to the number of people employed. Simply said, if you have an hour to do a 5-minute job, it will take an hour to do it. A large number of people accomplish less work than a smaller number of people. In the photo, the wildcat's huge paws are clamped onto the side of the white safari jeep in which Chapel was a passenger. Almost as tall as the jeep on her hind legs, she appears to be forcing her muzzle into the back window. Public demand for education has remained strong, reflecting the importance of education as a means of social progress. Aware of the added value of education to the world of work, the government continues to innovate and update the education system, in order to produce a qualified and competent workforce. Imagine living all your life as the only family on your street. Then, one morning, you open the front door and discover houses all around you. You see neighbors tending to their gardens and children walking to school. Where did all the people come from? What if the answer turned out to be that they had always been there, you just hadn't seen them? Traditional divisions of domestic work are understood to persist because of the strong association of the home with femininity and paid work with masculinity. To challenge who does what in the home is arguably tantamount to challenging what it is to be a woman or a man. Perhaps the most memorable benefit of the program has been the opportunity to meet in small groups. Something that is difficult to arrange in such a desperate organization. Many officers would have to work together for 30 years, but would not know others' weaknesses and strengths. Perhaps the most measurable benefit of the program has been the opportunity to meet in small groups, something that is difficult to arrange such a desperate organization. Many officers would have to work together for 30 years, but would not know others' strengths and weaknesses. The maximum yield of plants, determined by their genetic potential, is seldom achieved because factors such as insufficient water or nutrients, adverse climate conditions, plant diseases, and insect damage will limit growth at some stage. Plants subjected to these biotic and abiotic constraints are said to be stressed. There is no single method of learning that guarantees success. How we learn that depends on many different factors. And what works best for you will not necessarily be the same as the approach used for the other students, even they study the same course. We are all unique as learners, although some patterns emerge in any groups of students. The emergence of information technology has created new products, processes and distribution systems. New products include the computer, the internet and digital TV. New processes include internet banking, automated inventory control and automated teller machines, and new distribution systems include cable and satellite TV. You used to think that being green was a luxury for your company, but climate change has made you realize that you can no longer ignore it. The buzz is about becoming carbon neutral, but where do you start? Consider your drivers. Do you want to become carbon neutral for marketing reasons, financial reasons, or just to save the planet? A university is a lot more than just classes and exams. University is a concept that offers you a host of possibilities to develop both academically and personally. Find out about the different projects, clubs and societies that are in your university. You will definitely find something that you are interested in. The tsunamis could provide crucial information about the habitability of ancient Mars. The first one occurred when the planet must have been relatively warm and amenable for life, because it carved out backwash channels as it returned to the sea. By contrast, the planet had become much cooler by the time the second tsunami hit. The waters apparently flash froze after flowing onto the surface. To work effectively with the heterogeneous student populations found in our schools, educators have the responsibility of acknowledging the cultural backgrounds of their students and the cultural setting in which the school is located in order to develop effective instructional strategies. Internal combustion engine enables the driver to decide which source of power is appropriate for the travel requirements of a given journey. Major U.S. auto manufacturers are now developing feasible hybrid electric vehicles, and some are exploring fuel cell technology for their electric cars. Have you ever pictured a world without light? Just think how much we rely on man-made light sources in our life. Without engineers, we wouldn't be able to live the way we do. No streetlights, no TV, no computer displays, no house lights. Engineers design and build all these things. When we recycle, used materials are converted into new products, reducing the need to consume natural resources. If used materials are not recycled, new products are made by extracting fresh, raw material from the earth, through mining and forestry. Recycling helps conserve important raw materials and protects natural habitats for the future. Investigators also compared those microbes with those living in 52 other soil samples taken from all around the planet. The park had organisms that also exist in deserts, frozen tundra, forests, rainforests, and prairies. Antarctica was the only area that had microbes that did not overlap with those found in Central Park. Only a small percentage of the park's microbes were found to already be listed in databases. Thus, a country might possess a sizable rural population, but have an economic system in which the interests of the voters were predominantly related to their incomes, not to their occupation or location, and in such a country the political system would be unlikely to include an important agrarian party. The purpose of the informative speech is to provide interesting, useful, and unique information to your audience. By dedicating yourself to the goals of providing information and appealing to your audience, you can take a positive step toward succeeding in your efforts as an informative speaker. The training of an actor is an intensive process which requires curiosity, courage, and commitment. You will learn how to prepare for rehearsal, how to rehearse, and how to use independent and proactive processes that inform you to do the best work possible for both stage and screen. Globalization has affected what we eat in ways we are only beginning to understand. Modern food production is no longer related to our biological needs, but is in direct conflict with them. The relationship between diet and our fertility, cancer, heart disease, and mental illness is becoming clear. Yet much of our food is nutritionally bankrupt. The department determines whether or not the candidate has passed the examination. In cases where an appearance for the final public oral examination would constitute a substantial financial hardship for the candidate, the Director of Graduate Studies may recommend to the Dean of the Graduate School a virtual, video-conferenced examination of the candidate. Companies will want to be known not just for the financial results they generate, but equally for the imprint they leave on society as a whole. First, ensuring that their products contribute positively. Second, operating in a way that approaches a net neutral impact to the natural environment. And third, cherishing their people. The Royal Institution is an organization that has been around for 209 years. Many of the people that have worked here have been scientists themselves, including Michael Faraday. He made the discoveries that may be generating and using electricity much easier, making it possible for us all to switch on lights, cook for dinner, play games, consoles, much more. A thesis is a claim that you can argue for or against. It should be something that you can present persuasively and clearly. The scope of your paper, so keep in mind that page count. If possible, your thesis should be somewhat original. Today, telecommunication is widespread and devices that assist the progress are common in many parts of the world. There is also a vast array of networks that connect these devices, including computer, telephone and cable networks. Computer communication across the internet, such as email and instant messaging, is just one of many examples of telecommunication. There is a tendency, especially in the popular press, to concentrate on the negative effects of immigration. In that context, this lecture listing the benefits it brings to more developed nations is much more welcome. Also, it is delivered in a lively and amusing style. The fact is that those different types of services affect many different dimensions of well-being of people. And define the human well-being is also extremely challenging. However, we identified that there are certain items provide basic material for life, whether it be food, shelter or happiness. Nature offers no greater splendor than the starry sky on a clear, dark night. Silent and jeweled with the constellations of ancient myth and legend, the night sky has inspired wonder throughout the ages, a wonder that leads our imaginations far from the confines of Earth and the pace of the present day, and out into the distant reaches of space and cosmic time itself. There are two main types of market research. Quantitative research involves collecting a lot of information by using techniques such as questionnaires and other forms of survey. Qualitative research involves working with smaller samples of consumers, often asking them to discuss products and services while researchers take notes about what they have to say. Women who deliver their first child by caesarean section, C-section, are less likely to conceive a second child than those who deliver vaginally, despite being just as likely to plan a subsequent pregnancy, according to researchers. The team followed more than 2,000 women for 3 years after they delivered their first child. Researchers have found that a mutant strain of Sake yeast produces high levels of the amino acid ornithine. Ornithine has been found to reduce fatigue and improve sleep quality, and the non-genetically modified mutant yeast strain discovered in this study could be easily applied to brewing sake, a traditional Japanese alcoholic beverage, as well as wine and beer. Yet it is precisely in observing the intertwining of success and failure that Chasing the Flame makes its greatest mark. With piercing insight and relentless logic, it reveals the pitfalls of international politics and details an intricate struggle between individual and institution. It haunts us with the poignant truth that even a great man can do only so much to reinvent the world. In September 1620, a merchant ship called the Mayflower set sail from Plymouth, a port on the southern coast of England. Normally, the Mayflower's cargo was wine and dry goods, but on this trip the ship carried passengers, 102 of them, all hoping to start a new life on the other side of the Atlantic. The asteroid that slammed into the Moon 3.8 billion years ago, creating the Imbrium Basin, may have had a diameter of at least 150 miles, according to a new estimate. The work helps explain puzzling geological features on the Moon's near side, and has implications for understanding the evolution of the early solar system. University of Adelaide researchers have uncovered fundamental new information about the malting characteristics of barley grains. They say their finding could pave the way to more stable brewing processes or new malts for craft brewers. Published in the Nature publication Scientific Reports, the researchers discovered a new link between one of the key enzymes involved in malt production. The slight decline in drug overdose deaths in 2018 coincides with Chinese regulations on the powerful opioid carfentanil, rather than the result of domestic U.S. efforts to curb the epidemic, a new analysis reveals. What many, including President Donald Trump, perceived as a decline in overdose deaths in 2018, appears to be a return to the historic exponential curve. The terms summary and abstract are often used interchangeably, resulting in some confusion. This problem arises because there are two distinct types of abstracts, descriptive and informative. The informative abstract is sometimes called summary. The descriptive abstract is usually only 2 or 3 sentences in length, hence it is not a summary or very informative. Deaf children learning a language could certainly pursue the development of listening and spoken language skills if desired, and doing so would carry much less risk, knowing the child would have mastery in at least one language. If a child does not succeed in mastering either a spoken language or a sign language, we must then ask how much benefit the child derived from interventions. Scientists have recommended actions the government of Madagascar's recently elected President Andry should take to turn around the precipitous decline of biodiversity and help put Madagascar on a trajectory towards sustainable growth. Madagascar's protected areas, some of the most important for biodiversity in the world, have suffered terribly in recent years from illegal mining, logging, and collection of threatened species for the pet trade. The coronavirus pandemic has shifted many of our interactions online, with Zoom video calls replacing in-person classes, work meetings, conferences and other events. Will all that screen time damage our vision? Maybe not. It turns out that our visual perception is highly adaptable, according to new research. A research team has systematically investigated the cognitive abilities of lemurs, which have relatively small brains compared to other primates. Conducting systematic tests with identical methods revealed that cognitive abilities of lemurs hardly differ from those of monkeys and great apes. Instead, this study revealed that the relationship between brain size and cognitive abilities cannot be generalized, and it provides new insights into the evolution of primates. Modern humans arrived in Western Europe 41,000 to 38,000 years ago, about 5,000 years earlier than previously known, according to an international team of researchers that discovered stone tools used by modern humans, dated to the earlier time period in a cave near the Atlantic coast of central Portugal. Scientists studying brain scans of people who were asked to come up with incentive uses for everyday objects found a specific pattern of connectivity that correlated with the most creative responses. Researchers were then able to use that pattern to predict how creative other people's responses would be based on their connections in this network. Researchers have designed an artificial intelligence model that is better able to predict how much students are learning in educational games. The improved model makes use of an AI training concept called multitask learning and could be used to improve both instruction and learning outcomes. Whether flu or coronavirus, it can take several days for the body to ramp up an effective response to a viral infection. New research describes how different cells in the immune system work together, communicate, and, in the case of cells called neutrophils, bring about their own death to help fight off infections. The findings could have important implications for the development of vaccines. In 2016, the world's largest ever data leak, dubbed the Panama Papers, exposed a scandal, uncovering a vast global network of people, including celebrities and world leaders, who used offshore tax havens, anonymous transactions through intermediaries, and shell corporations to hide their wealth, grow their fortunes, and avoid taxes. Thus, language acquisition might be like other biological functions. The linguistic clumsiness of tourists and students might be the price we pay for the linguistic genius we displayed as babies, just as the decrepitude of age is the price we pay for the vigor of youth. Closure activities allow participants to consolidate learning, say goodbye to group mates, and attend to any unfinished business prior to the ending of the group experience. Generally, these activities involve some reflection upon what has been learned or accomplished during the preceding time together, and a sharing of those thoughts or insights with other participants. This is an extremely useful resource, which ranks books and academic papers on the subject not only in terms of their reliability, but also their readability. As a result, it is likely to save students time and effort that would otherwise have been spent working through a lot of dense texts before finding the one they really need. This course provides an introduction to the history and development of the British legal system. Its aim is to describe the evolution of the common law of England, the legal system of England, and to introduce you to the study of constitutions as law, and to the legal aspects of constitutional systems of government. Credit unions are non-profit organizations that were imported to the United States from Germany in the early 1900s. They were regulated in 1934 by the Federal Credit Union Act, which limits membership to groups sharing a common bond of occupation or association. Groups from particular geographical areas also were eligible to join credit unions. Global water consumption has increased almost fourfold in the past 100 years, and many regions can only meet their water demand, thanks to essential contributions from mountain regions. In 30 years, almost a quarter of the world's lowland population will strongly depend on runoff from the mountains. Only sustainable development can ensure the important function of mountain areas. Just how stressed are teachers? A recent Gallup poll found teachers are tied with nurses for the most stressful occupation in America today. Unfortunately, that stress can have a trickle-down effect on their students, leading to disruptive behavior that results in student suspensions. A new study comprehensively reveals how civil wars impact wildlife in countries affected by conflict. Researchers found that the main impacts of civil wars on native mammals are often indirect, ultimately arising from institutional and socio-economic changes, rather than from direct military tactics. Most succulent plants are found in regions where there is little rainfall, dry air, plenty of sunshine, porous soils, and high temperatures during part of the year. These conditions have caused changes in plant structures, which have resulted in greatly increased thickness of stems, leaves, and sometimes roots, enabling them to store moisture from the infrequent rains. The most important issue is concerned with the problem of funding. Social services receive different donations or grants from the government. However, these sums are not sufficient for the solution of all problems. The second most important issue consists of huge spending. The money social services achieve is not enough for normal functioning. The third problem, affecting human services, is the lack of skilled and experienced employees. The United States is at present the world's market for motor cars and trucks. An agent for the U.S. Bureau of Foreign and Domestic Commerce reports a prosperous condition of affairs prevailing in Japan, which is buying more automobiles, especially large cars, than ever before. Researchers have found a way to convert the aromatic substance vanillin into a redox-active electrolyte material for liquid batteries. The technology is an important step towards ecologically sustainable energy storage. The audio, which includes more than 1,000 separate data files, was captured in the early 1970s by the late Hetty van der Riet. She recorded the various screams, barks, and howl calls made by a group of chimps, including 17 youngsters, living in the Gombe National Park in Tanzania. A total of 5 ozone ascents were taken at Bahati Station, Indian Mission, Antarctica from April to June 2016. As a stratospheric temperatures reduced to -82.24 C on 20th of June 2016, indicating the formation of stratospheric clouds, leading scientists at Bahati Station feared that Montreal Accord has not succeeded to control the emission of ozone-depleting gases in the atmosphere. How quickly this occurs depends on the dynamics of fertility, mortality and overseas migration. While a moderate pace of demographic change allows for gradual adjustment of the economy and policies to the changing population demographics, rapid changes are more difficult to manage. As a result, governments and society as a whole may need to take actions to address these issues. European wildcats, thought to be extinct 50 or so years ago in the Jura Mountains, have since recolonized part of their former territory. This resurgence in an area occupied by domestic cats has gone hand in hand with genetic crosses between the two species. A team of biologists modeled the interactions between the two species to predict that hybridization will entail the irreversible genetic replacement of wildcats. Astronomers think planets can exist in orbits far from their star, and propose a two-step process. Interactions with the star or inner planets kick it out of the inner system, and then a passing star stabilizes the orbit to keep it bound. Such a scenario could explain the hypothesized Planet 9 in our solar system. Researchers have discovered a new superhighway network to travel through the solar system much faster than was previously possible. Such routes can drive comets and asteroids near Jupiter to Neptune's distance in under a decade and to 100 astronomical units in less than a century. They could be used to send spacecraft to the far reaches of our planetary system relatively fast. Fake news can distort people's beliefs even after being debunked. For example, repeated over and over, a story such as the one about the Pope endorsing Trump can create a glow around a political candidate that persists long after the story is exposed as fake. A 2017 study published in the journal Intelligence suggests that some people may have an especially difficult time rejecting misinformation. The power of the sun, wind and sea may soon combine to produce clean-burning hydrogen fuel, according to researchers. A team integrated water purification technology into a new proof-of-concept design for a seawater electrolyzer, which uses an electric current to split apart the hydrogen and oxygen in water molecules. Sleep behavior is also known as sleep disorder. People with sleep disorder often talk or walk in their sleep. They are not aware of what they are talking about or where they are going. There isn't any serious effects on body in general, but it may be connected to the mental health. People with childhood traumas, unspeakable problem or depression are the ones with different sleep behaviors. Artificial neural networks have recently become the state-of-the-art technique for crucial signal processing applications, such as specific frequencies classification, structural health monitoring, diseases detection in power electronics circuitry and motor fault detection. This is an expected outcome, as there are numerous advantages of using an adaptive and compact deep counterparts, which particularly it can be efficiently trained with a limited dataset of signals, besides requiring data transformation. Biology is the natural science that studies life and living organisms, including their physical structure, chemical processes, physiological mechanisms, and evolution. Certain unifying concepts consolidated into a single and coherent field that recognizes genes as the basic unit of heredity, and evolution as the engine that propels the creation and extinction. These decisions are highly nuanced. Of course, we use a lot of data to inform our decisions, but we also rely very heavily on iteration, research, testing, intuition, and human empathy. Now, sometimes the designers who work on these products are called data-driven, which is a term that totally drives us bonkers. The fact is, it would be irresponsible of us not to rigorously test our designs, when so many people are counting on us to get it right. Charlie Chaplin and his brother Sidney were placed in an orphanage at a very early age. Becoming a vaudeville performer, he joined Fred Karno's company in 1906. He made his film debut in Making a Living, and introduced the famous seedy and soft-hearted gentleman tramp routine, which became his hallmark. Numerous films for various studios brought him world fame, all based on his mastery of pathos and slapstick acrobatics,